This is Generous Theology. What is the modern fascination with the great American novel? How does it relate to secular ideas of establishing a canon of humanistic scripture?
So, Chuck, as I just mentioned a second ago, I love hitting you quote unquote cold with topics that you haven't had time to prepare for or rehearse for. So, we really get a fresh take here. And part of me enjoys that process. And then part of me wishes I gave you more of a heads up. But obviously, the first part won out here tonight is we're going to take a look at an interesting topic that I think has a subtle and perhaps arguable link with the other work that you and I like to do with respect to reading important texts in the philosophical tradition, in theology, the scriptures themselves, obviously. And now tonight we want to talk about an interesting subject, and this would be the idea of the great American novels. Rather than give you a strong preface, I'm going to maybe throw you into the deep end of the pool and see if you have any thoughts on the great American novel. Have you ever read any of the books that some people throw out as having that quality? And if so, what were your thoughts about it? And what do you think people are getting at when they're trying to come up with this interesting idea of this great American novel?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just looking at the links here that you included in the Discord, and I have read a number of these that are suggested as the great American novel. It's interesting as I'm searching down, I see one of them is USA by John Dos Passos. And it's interesting. I just had a conversation not too long ago. A number of years ago, a number of people at my church decided to start a fiction book club. And it's led by a couple that they were teachers. He taught at the local Christian high school. She taught at the local Christian junior high, both in English and then I'm part of it. And then just a number of other people joined. And we don't do it at my church anymore because most of the members aren't members of my church now. But we get together approximately once a month, a little less in the summertime, and we read through a novel. And we had just finished the USA novel by John Dos Passos is actually a combination of three novels, and it's put together into later it was combined into USA, a trilogy. And we read the first of the three novels for our January meeting. And we talked a little bit about, first of all, what is the great American novel? Does any of those novels by Dos Passos qualify? What does it take to be a good novel? And then just some ideas about are there others? And what's interesting is Dos Passos, he really took a reporter's eye view, or at least what he thought would be a reporter's eye view, where he would just take this unblinking look with no passion, but just telling the story of these various characters and it's really a set of vignettes, and the characters come back and forth, but you'll go to another character and a little bit about them, and then another character, and then it's in between there are these headlines from the era, which the first book takes place in the area just in the early 20th century, leading up to the First World War and that era. And so he's got all these headlines, and he's got some sort of stream of consciousness kind of stuff. And it was interesting. I think we as a group decided that we're not so sure that USA was, or at least the first novel in USA, was the great American novel. It was a little too avant-garde perhaps for us. There wasn't necessarily the plot-driven focus as you get in something, for example, Moby Dick or The Grapes of Wrath or some of those others that are often thought of as the great American novel. But it was an interesting discussion to have. This could be fun to walk through maybe some of these and in looking at what people think might be the great American novel. What is the same about them? What's different about them? And is there really such a thing as the great American novel? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I do. And I have come to see the great American novel in perhaps a darker sense than maybe many mean it. So, first of all, if we look at the GAN in a prima facie sense, what are people talking about when they're talking about this search for this quote unquote great American novel? And I think the idea is, so some people make it about the American experience and existence, but there are really notable reasons why I suspect it's actually not about the great American experience in an important way. So if you take a look at this list from this article that we have, I'm just going to read some of the contenders here. Now, this is just a brief survey in this article that we're referencing. It's not an exhaustive survey. And one of the beautiful things about the great American novel is its fluidity. One critic may have a different idea of what makes a great American novel than another. But I think we're going to see some things start to come out that take a darker tone for me as someone who's interested in perhaps what the GAN is all about. So let me just read the contenders here that's listed in this evaluation. So the first one is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Then we have Moby Dick by Herman Melville. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Thomas Pynchon's work, Mason and Dixon. Easton Ellis and his novel, American Psycho. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Don DeLillo, Underworld. Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, USA by John Dos Passos, that you've mentioned. Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. And then William Faulkner's book, Light in August. And then a second novel by Faulkner called Absalom. Also, John Updike's Rabbit Run. David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. The Adventures of Augie March by Saul Bellow. Anita Lou's Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Beloved by Toni Morrison. The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. Freedom by Jonathan Franzen. And I could go on through there and maybe there's just 3 or 4 left, but those really give maybe a high level, interesting starting points. First of all, there's one sense in which I don't have any problem with the great American novel. If you take it at face value as an attempt to showcase great literature that's largely a part of either the American experience or related to the Pax Americana or related to some of the secularly acceptable ideas that grew up in the American system, then this is all well and good. I think I have read perhaps maybe 5 or 6 of these items on the list. I've read Gatsby, Moby Dick, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, The Grapes of Wrath, Absalom, Rabbit Run. So a good number of these. And if I can just throw out there the sort of dark twist that I think I see, and Chuck, this is absolutely an arguable point, but I still think it's worth making. I wish to put the great American novel out as an example of the secularizing forces of the formerly Christian, or let's say the Christian becoming secularized West. And so one of the things that I notice I don't see here, first of all, before I get to what I don't see here, let me just say that some of the other novels that are included in this, as well as novels that are written here, are written from what I would call a profane modernistic perspective. And what do I mean by that? It's this idea that, I just remembered the novel I was thinking about. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser is another one that I've read that has this sort of connotation to it. But what I'm noticing is I would put each of the items that I've read in the post-Christian America, almost as like a renaissance or an awakening of secular ideals and humanistic ideals out of the cradle of Christian civilization. And so in some sense, I almost see this as a modernistic form of a renaissance, of an awakening. And I see the moderns portraying it that way. And at the end of the day, what I notice is I won't see very many Christian themed works ever proposed for the great American novel. For example, one of the ones that I think of that if there were to be a great American novel, as I would understand it, I would think of Lewis Wallace's Ben-Hur. But as wonderful as I think and sublime in the way that other great American novel candidates are, I've never seen it proposed and I've never seen it advocated for. And I can't recall a time that I remember people proposing Christian-themed work here. Let me see. Oh, another candidate that pops to mind, Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. And I almost want to throw out, at the risk of overstatement, that the great American novel might be, in some sense, a search for a post-Christian canon. And that's the interesting hook or tie-in that I wanted to come back to here. And that's the part that I think is a little bit dark. Now, I've laid some breadcrumbs to try to get you and the listener to walk down that track, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've done it. How does that strike you, and where would you go with some of this reading and what you think these novels are ultimately about?